our 2018 Mid-Atlantic storm chasing recap. We're going to talk about some specific storms that each of us has chased here over this past chase season. We've done this before. I think this is like the third year in a row. I don't know. Do you remember, Andrew? Is this like the third or fourth year?
I think it's third.
Okay. So, but we got our distinguished panelists here. From my left to right, which I think is reversed on the television screen, I have Andrew Smith from Richmond, and Bill Hark, also from Richmond, and Pete Forrester, who is coming from Charlottesville tonight, right?
That's right.
Right. Okay. And of course, I'm in Roanoke, Virginia. We're all in Virginia. We may have somebody else join us. We have another invitation or two out, but we'll see if that happens. But what we essentially want to do is just to each of us has a particular chase event that we've looked at or we were involved in this past year, and we're all going to show different pictures, videos, radar grabs, whatever it may be, to kind of give us an idea of what it was like to chase that particular event and what it's like specifically, of course, to chase here in the Mid-Atlantic. All of us have been chasing out west in the plains, and we can tell you that it's a lot different chasing back here. You know, but there are plenty of good storms and plenty of good scenes to see back here. So who wants to go first? Anybody want to volunteer? Or do I draft somebody?
I'm set. I can go.
All right, Peter, go ahead. Cool.
So I'm going to talk about a fluke tornado that kind of happened in Charlottesville, basically just outside of the city limits of Charlottesville. And I'm going to pull up my little presentation here. Let me know if you guys can see that.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so this was rated an EF0 tornado. It was on August 2nd, 2018, and that's my my little storm chasing logo that I threw together this year. It's pretty good. So this is the shot I got of the tornado while it was on the ground. It was not a fully condensed funnel, but you can see there, this was toward the end of the lifespan of the tornado, so it's almost got a rope out stage here. It kind of looks like a rope right down the middle. And you can see the wall
Pete, am I the only one that see anything? Are you guys seeing pictures?
I see a black square.
Black square.
Yeah.
Hang on.
There we go.
All right, I'll just go with this then.
Okay.
So yeah, this is the shot I got of the tornado. This is the end of the lifespan. You can see the rope here in the middle, and the big wall cloud up above. And this was as it was passing over the city of Charlottesville, almost over downtown. And then a little bit later at 11:30, I went ahead and chased this storm up the Route 20 corridor, which is just east of Route 29. And you can see there it's a large mesocyclone ground scraping, very low LCLs this day. And this was interesting because the storm was not warned by the National Weather Service, and the rotation on radar only appeared after the tornado had touched down. And this storm ended up being tornado warned a little further closer towards Fredericksburg. But at this point, while the tornado was on the ground, and then afterwards when I got this picture of the mesocyclone, the storm was not warned. So looking at things from a synoptic scale, there really weren't many distinguishable features in the area, which made this one difficult to forecast. You can see there on the top right of the screen the surface analysis from the Weather Prediction Center. There was a stationary boundary over in West Virginia that was providing a little bit of lift. But if you look at the satellite image there, you can see it had some nice clear air over eastern Virginia, reaching all the way to the Blue Ridge. And that provided a little bit of instability for the thunderstorms to fire, but not a whole lot. And there's no large-scale synoptic features that would have driven a large tornado outbreak or a dynamic event, the kind that usually produce tornadoes in this area.
Hey,
so here's
Pete, oh, okay. There's the date. I was going to ask you the date on this. I don't remember hearing that.
It was August 2nd.
Okay.
Yeah, August 2nd. So we have here the shear profiles. And it's decent shear. Over Charlottesville, it was about 45 knots of bulk shear that surfaced to 6 kilometers in the atmosphere. But the storm relative helicity was very low. Through the full layer of the atmosphere, it was only 50, which is It's a lot lower than what we'd like to see, obviously, and really nothing to raise your eyebrows at. Supercell composite was 2 to 4 in the area, a little pocket of 4. You can see centered almost over Charlottesville there, a little bit further east, but that's mostly driven by the instability with Cape around 1,500 joules and the overlap of the shear there to the north. This was the sounding out of Dulles, a little ways north of Charlottesville. And you can see at the surface there were southerly winds, but it was weak. And, you know, nothing really stands out about this for a severe weather outbreak or a tornado. And you can see in the lower left corner there, we've got some of the indicators for supercell or significant tornado, and they're all zeros. And the Storm Prediction Center kind of had the same idea. They issued a marginal outlook for the area with a 0% tornado risk. So the marginal would have been for isolated damaging wind gusts. So this is the loop of the tornado radar. I'm not sure it's going to play for us here. But so the Sterling radar was 80 miles to the north, so the elevation of the beam height by the time it gets to Charlottesville is 7,000 feet. And unfortunately, Charlottesville sits in an area that's happy for range folding. So while this tornado was happening, the National Weather Service wasn't seeing the data that would indicate strong rotation on velocity. And even the reflectivity, there was nothing like a hook echo. It was a messy complex of storms that came up out of the south. It just looked like heavy rain. In fact, I remember tweeting about it before the rain came, and I just said, well, here we go, another rainy day. And something happened, and it decided to drop a tornado. This is the radar right as it was produced, or right after it produced the tornado. And you can see there over Charlottesville, very strong velocities, indicating some rotation there, tight rotation. But if you look at the reflectivity there on the left side, there's no hook echo, nothing that would indicate the average signs that we look for in a supercell. So the tornado report came in as an EF0 2-mile path just south of Charlottesville. And I was looking through the observations from the airport station, the airport weather station, which was a few miles north of where the tornado happened. And you see right there at 10:53 a.m., which was immediately before the storm hit the area, you have a surface wind of 6 miles an hour from the south-southeast. So in hindsight, that kind of clued me off because the storm motion was from the southwest. So that's a 45-degree angle, basically, or almost 90 degrees of backed surface winds. They're weak, but relatively backed according to the storm motion. So here's those two shots again. 11:07 a.m. was as the tornado was lifting and the wall cloud and rotation passed over the city of Charlottesville. And then there on the right was the mesocyclone further to the north after the storm had cycled. It didn't produce another tornado after this, but it was a ground scraping rotation that did go tornado warned later. And this was an interesting shot after the storm, after the rotation passed directly over me. I got a shot of the clear slot RFD that came around the backside of the storm. And you can see the precipitation core there off to the left. And on the right side, clear slot, you can see right up the updraft. And that was interesting. At the time, I didn't know had dropped a tornado. I thought I was looking at a funnel cloud or some sort of scud because those features are common to see on days like this. But I felt when the RFD wrapped around the backside of the storm, it was warm, it was dry, and that tipped me off that something interesting had happened. And this was after the tornado, immediately after it passed over my head. Once I realized that there was damage, I was getting Twitter reports from local media and some friends that I knew down in the area. It caused, what you'd expect from a small tornado. It was a damage path of maybe 150, 200 yards wide. Trees were snapped off. Large trees were snapped off. Trees were uprooted. Fortunately, I didn't see any damage to homes. They got lucky with the trees falling all around the home. You can see that one at the top right there. Didn't take much damage, but massive trees split in half. And then a little later, after it touched down, it actually hit the Monticello High School, which is a very large high school in the area. Took a chunk of the gym roof off and knocked down light poles and took trees down. And by the time I got there, they were fixing the blown out doors and windows and trying to get the debris off the road so that they could go to school the next day. I think the school did end up being canceled. I did manage to get this video, and it was actually featured on several media outlets. Here on the left was a local Virginia newspaper that used my photos. You could see there's some of the damage to the school. But the cool thing about this was that my footage of the damage ended up on CBS News and ABC World News. They were both featured because this storm system, the stationary boundary, actually ended up creating quite a bit of flooding. And the tornado was one of actually two. One hit New York City and the other one hit Charlottesville. So major news networks picked up that video. So looking at the map, I've got Charlottesville in the upper center of the map here. And the red line is about where the tornado was. Again, a very short path. Fortunately, it missed heavily populated areas. If it had been another 2 miles to the north, it would have gone right through the middle of Charlottesville, and that probably would have been a more dangerous situation for sure. So my location was with the blue arrow in the upper right corner, and where I was looking when I took that photo. And at the time, I didn't realize that the tornado was coming right at me. I knew that there was rotation, but the way the terrain was and the way that the trees were blocking my view of the ground, I didn't realize that there was a strong ground circulation at the time. Another look at this from the terrain's perspective is the tornado paralleled a ridge. So the storm came up out of the valley from the southwest and dropped the tornado right along parallel to the ridge. And you can see how the back south-southeast winds probably contributed to that low-level rotation. And in the analysis of this, kind of thinking about what happened, I almost wonder if there was some current eddy happening at the surface winds as they come over that ridge. And then when the storm just picked that up, it somehow reached the right kind of dynamic to drop that low-level, really brief but strong rotation. Yeah, but other than that, I can't figure out why this tornado happened. It must have had topographic effects, and then just those slight backing of the winds was enough to bring it the extra mile. And one more look at the storm reports out of that day. Mostly wind reports. I think the SPC did a pretty good job, but the event did end up overproducing in the entire Mid-Atlantic. And there were 3 tornadoes that day. So one in Georgia, one over Charlottesville, and then one in the Bronx, I think. There was video of that tornado which came out of the Bronx. So yeah, that's what I got. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you.
Cool. Well, I know based on experience down here with the same problem with ridges and swirling winds, I would bet that there was some kind of eddy that came off the edge of that ridge and provided those southeast winds. Either that or it was a weak outflow boundary from another shower, but that's kind of hard to tell this at this point.
Yeah, it's really hard to distinguish features like that in the first place. And unless you have super high resolution modeling or observations, it's just so difficult to really understand what happens in that scale. And I mean, the best observations we have are the radar scans, and they're 7,000 feet above where the action was happening.
Yeah, I had the same problem in the Fredericksburg area. That's roughly about 60 miles from the radar, and the elevation was 4,000 to 5,000 feet. Any circulations below that, they just frankly didn't see.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All righty. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll go next since chronologically the storm I'm going to cover is next because it happened in June. And before we get to the 2 folks that I know are going to talk about some September events. So let me go ahead and I will share my screen here. Let's see if I can get this to come up. Got that?
Yeah, looks good.
All right. Well, this was June 22nd of this past year. Synoptically, I didn't pull the maps down, but synoptically, there was an upper level low over the Midwest that was pinwheeling little vorticity maxima around it. I hesitate to call them short waves, but that's kind of roughly what they were. And then there was a stationary boundary where you see the SPC slight risk here is a stationary boundary, essentially centered on the 460 Route 460 corridor and going up just north of Interstate 64. So based on what I was seeing from storm motions being out of the southwest and this boundary, I figured if there's any discrete cell would go up and run into that boundary, then we might see some action. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. In fact, I know Peter was on the other side of the storm once it fired. He can fill in a little bit later. I picked up the storm when it was in Bedford County, which is in between Lynchburg and Roanoke, and so it's about halfway in between there. It came up from the southwest again as a discrete cell, and I found a decent spot where I could actually take a look at the cell as it came toward me, and this is what I saw. I've got a little video clip here I'll show in just a minute, but this, if you take a look at this closely, this is a wall cloud, and this is a wall cloud on the left and the right. The one on the right was actually spinning anticyclonically, which I thought was interesting. And as a matter of fact, you can see that on the radar here. I've got you can see my position, and on the reflectivity, there was a little hook echo down there. But then just to my north, there was an anticyclonic rotation, and then to my southwest, there was this cyclonic rotation, which produced the hook echo. I thought it was really interesting to see that. Let me see here. Let me stop sharing this one for just a minute and see if I can pull up this video and share this. See if this will work. I was trying to do it all on the presentation and it wasn't working, so I had to split it up a little bit. All right, you guys see that? This will clear up a little bit. This was converted from my live stream, so it's a little blurry to begin with. But if you watched, the wall cloud is kind of toward the center, right center, is actually picking up moisture from the rain shaft, and it's spinning anticyclonically. And then over on the left center, you can see the southwestern wall cloud is actually spinning cyclonically, which I thought was interesting. And over time, the southwestern one became dominant, and that's what took over, and that's the portion that became tornado warned eventually here. So let me stop doing that and go back to this. Bill, I think you've got a really noisy computer fan.
Oh, is that coming from me, you think?
Yeah, I had muted you a little earlier just because I was trying to figure out who it was.
Oh, so. Let me mute myself for a bit.
Okay. Well, we can come back to it. It's not really that bad. It's just I was trying to figure out where it was coming from. So this is the southern wall cloud after it took over and became dominant, or I should say the southwestern portion. You can see that it had pretty good structure there. And at this point, it was probably maybe 2 miles to my southwest. I had a little bit of difficulty as the storm passed by because this was in rural Bedford County, and it was heading northeast toward Lynchburg. And the difficulty I had was actually getting back to a good road, an open road where I could actually keep up with it. It was crossing Route 460. As a matter of fact, I'll pull this up. This was a little bit later. This is a little after 3:30 on June 22nd here. And you can see the storm, the core of the storm is now over Route 460 between Bedford and Lynchburg. And for me to get there, it was all rural roads. So I couldn't, take a direct path. But so I managed to find a spot where at this position where I could see the rear of the storm. Here you can see the ground scraping wall cloud. There may have been a funnel under it. Who knows? Couldn't tell because of the trees. That's typical here in Virginia. But this storm went on. I managed to finally make my way back up to Route 460. as this storm approached the airport. And here's the radar view. This is the velocity view here at 4:06, about half an hour after that last shot I showed you. And I was actually parked on the west side of the airport, very close to the circulation, and could see nothing because it was all drenched in rain. As a matter of fact, my entire trip, once I got onto 460, was in torrential rain. Actually, I had to slow down a couple of times before I pulled off here at the airport. So that was June 22nd. It wound up being a tornado warning storm. I don't think there were any confirmed funnels. I didn't see any, although the wall cloud was actually rotating pretty good. I know. Let me stop sharing this here. I know Peter was on the other side of that storm. What did you guys see from your location, Pete?
Yeah, so it was me and Mark Overbeck, and we ended up at the airport, the Lynchburg airport, just south of town, and we watched that thing come right into Lynchburg, and it was crazy. I remember it was a high precipitation supercell, so we could see the wall cloud, and at one point, like it looked like a shelf cloud, but you could tell it was actually inflow being fed into the rotation area. And then that hook echo showed up on radar really well, but we could see it in person. And it was a green blob that rotated around the wall cloud. And
is that an official term?
Yeah, blob. But we were up there watching it because the airport sits up on a nice hill, and suddenly saw it coming across the trees. We were like, man, we got to get out of here, because we saw how strong the rotation was on radar. And we're like, we don't want to get caught in a rain wrapped tornado or anything like that. So we bailed on 460 pretty quick. But yeah, it was a really impressive storm, and you were looking at it from the opposite side that we were.
Right, and that was, I remember seeing your pictures, and it kind of helped fill in some corners for me in terms of what my vantage points that I couldn't get. But it was especially for Virginia, it was an impressive storm, and that's June. The third week in June is pretty much the peak of those kind of storms here in this part of the state. Yeah. And it was one of those things where I don't remember specifically if that boundary that was laying across 460 was a wedge front or just a warm front that had slowed down. But that was one of those things that you pay attention to. When you see storms going up and heading toward a shear zone like that, especially here in Virginia, you take advantage of all the factors you can, and that was a good one.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was a wedge boundary, because I remember we stayed ahead of the storm, and it ended up running into the wedge, and it died, much to our dismay, because we wanted it to live longer than 50 miles. But yeah.
Yeah, I do remember following y'all along on that day, and we here in Richmond were kind of sitting right inside the wedge, and it was another one of those days where y'all were getting the magic out there, and here in Richmond it was just kind of like, well, enjoy the gray cloudiness.
Yeah, here's the picture from the airport, with the wall cloud there on the right, and then the hook, the RFD there on the left. So really impressive looking storm.
Yeah, where I wound up was over there. If you see the control tower on the other side,
yeah, I
was in the parking lot below that control tower. But by the time I got there, it was just pouring down rain. That whole rain shaft had taken over that area.
On that storm, was there a lot of hail? I'm looking at that shaft right there.
I did not experience any hail, Bill. I was trying to make sure I didn't run into it for sure, because I was watching the radar. But I didn't experience any hail. Did you see any hail reports that day, Pete?
I may have seen one or two like dime-sized reports, but I don't know for sure.
Right. So that was my tale of June 22nd. So who's next?
I guess I can talk about Florence a little bit.
All right.
What limited resources I have here. It's kind of a blessing and a curse when you're dialed into the news station the whole time. You're so focused on giving them reports, and especially on a day like this day was, I didn't really have the time to sit down and capture radar images as they were happening. So I'm relying on a lot of Wakefield's post-storm analysis here to kind of guide through some of the starts of the day. So the setup was we had the remains of Florence coming up the western parts of the Appalachian Mountains. I'm going to pull up a map here. Kind of gives the rough idea. Share. Application. Well, let's do this. Y'all see that?
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, the setup was the remains of Florence were heading up through West Virginia. So here on the east side of the mountains, we had this nice backing wind starting to form with the nice area low pressure sitting up here to our northwest. Backing winds here, just pulling in plenty of warm, moist air off of the Atlantic. So the earlier in the day setup featured some of kind of a big mass of rain coming up over eastern Virginia. I believe even this early in the day on the southern end, a tornado was confirmed down in Boykins, Virginia. But, you know, just early in the day, it was just a big mess of rain that moved through Richmond. However, south of this is where the destabilization was starting to go on. And as we moved forward about 5 hours, that mass of rain had moved north. And the recovery of the atmosphere behind it was beginning. You can see, based even on the radar here, storms are already firing on this more intense instability in the area. And then you can really see, especially close to Richmond here, the surface winds were really starting to back even more just a direct southeast as opposed to more of a south-southeast. And then one of the soundings from that day, you know, it showed, you know, it had a nice curved, photograph there. You watch, you know, look over here at the vertical wind profile, see southeast winds moving up to southwest winds. Not very strong as you went higher, but these storms weren't exactly big time supercells. They were kind of your classic Virginia low top supercells.
Right.
So you still got the higher winds in the upper part of the storm, but you weren't worried about, you know, having 100 knot winds upwards of 50,000 feet. So even the sounding here indicated tornado, and it was pretty spot on for that day. So I started out, pull up Google Maps here. I started out right around this part of Richmond here along the Midlothian Turnpike, and I just immediately went west. There were storms starting to come up from the southwestern part of Chesterfield County down here around Wood Lake, Brandon Mill area, and they were moving to the northeast towards the west end of Richmond, Tuckahoe area. And so I caught my first storm as it was crossing Midlothian Turnpike. And I know this video is I'm not going to try to play the video. I think it'd probably wipe out my connection. But this was my view as I was online, as I was broadcasting for Channel 6, sitting right in front of Johnson Willis Hospital. This storm here was rotating. It had been a big mass of rain initially, and then as I started to be able to get closer to the base, it just opened up with this really dark, low base. And it was a ground scraping wall cloud. I was blown away that I didn't get a tornado as I was sitting right here. I mean, it'd been a perfect time for us, as you know, trying to cover this stuff on Channel 6, having a tornado go right across the road there. It eventually did, about a mile north of here, finally put down a tornado. But if you can see in my little preview window at the bottom of the screen, you can see the rotation.
Oh yeah.
As the storm goes by, and the video, if I played it in real time, doesn't really do justice of how strong the rotation was out there. And then there were wisps of clouds right down near the ground that were whipping around into the mesocyclone. I mean, it was, for being around here, it was probably one of the more intense tornado intercepts I've had, at least at such a close range.
Right.
You know, I've seen a couple of tornadoes around the Richmond area, but nothing up close, and nothing this low ground scraping, intense looking. So this storm wound up moving to the north and produced a tornado just a few miles away from here. I'll pull up the imagery here of it. So this was the track of that tornado. It touched down in the Bon Air area right around Huguenot and Old Gun Road, moved its way up across the river, and went up through the Tuckahoe region, up towards Three Chop Road and Forest Avenue, not too far from where I live, which was kind of the other scary part of this day was not only having one storm go near your house, having multiple storms keep training and going by your house.
Yeah.
And so as I go, let me go back to the map here. There were at least 4 or 5 storms that tracked through this exact same path in about a 4-hour time frame. And it was, you know, the hardest things about chasing out here in Virginia is, number one, it's Virginia. You're curvy roads, you've got trees. It's a lot more difficult than chasing out west. What made this, number 2, more difficult was I was in an urban area, and it was getting semi-close to rush hour. So dealing with rush hour traffic, you know, made it even more difficult. And I'm having to cross the river loop back around, get to the next storm, come back across. And in this particular area I was chasing, there weren't a lot of good vantage points that I could get to and see. I was constantly struggling most of the day trying to find a place to look west. The western part of Richmond, especially north of the river, is a lot of trees, not a lot of hilly points where you can kind of get up above the trees or even just have a vista to the west. But one of the few images I was able to capture that day when I was out there was crossing the Huguenot Bridge into Richmond. And this was, oh, wow, I believe, the second storm that came through. Oh, no, excuse me. This was the first one. So this is the one that I caught crossing Midlothian. So this, right, you can't really see it, and I was watching it. This area right here above this black car was spinning pretty rapidly. Again, because of the trees, I couldn't say for sure whether I saw a tornado on the ground or not, but looking back at the storm reports, it seems fairly obvious that there was a tornado on the ground underneath this. And you can see a ton of people had stopped on the bridge here. So I'm guessing just a minute or two before I got here, they had a view of a tornado crossing the river, or a good funnel cloud trying to reach down to the river as it was heading north from here. And give you perspective, the University of Richmond's right over here, and there was some good video of this wall cloud moving right by the campus, so I think right near their football stadium. So the second storm of that day, I circled back around, tried to get to it, but it was a doozy of the day. It was the one that wound up producing the EF2 tornado out on Hull Street, and unfortunately caused a fatality at a flooring, or I believe I think like a flooring company, kind of their stockpile area. So this storm followed a very similar path as the first one. Started in southern Chesterfield, worked its way across Hull Street, came up to Midlothian. So to give you perspective, the first storm I saw cross Midlothian right here, and this one crossed it probably 3 miles to the east. So very similar paths, same areas, time and time again. This particular one I came in behind on as I was trying to recover from the first storm. And I was getting a little frustrated trying to catch up to these, but I kept seeing, as I was pretty much doing the same path, I would see the leaves in the air. Like I could tell there was a tornado churning somewhere, because the next thing I know, there are leaves just starting to fall out of the air. And I'm trying to relay this information back to the station. And I mean, they're just in such wall-to-wall coverage with so much stuff coming through. It was a little frustrating trying to get through to them at times and tell them what's going on. And when I was trying to recover back onto the storm, as I was getting onto Midlothian Turnpike from Chippenham, I could see another base starting to form actually off to my east. And when I looked at the radar at the time, I could tell another little cell was kind of forming in that exact same area, but I, couldn't really, the radar, it didn't look impressive on radar at all. And I just said, I just see a base forming here. This has to be something. And sure enough, about 15 minutes later, there's a tornado warning on it, and there winds up being a tornado confirmed in the Westover Hills area of Richmond, which isn't too far from where that occurred. But the storms on radar, I didn't think were anything impressive, at least when you looked at the reflectivities. I'm going to pull up one of those here. The reflectivities, this is thanks to Wakefield's write-up on the storms that day. Kind of murky looking storms, nothing super impressive by any means. I mean, you can maybe argue there's a little bit of a hook in that area, but certainly nothing that would kind of really light your eyes up. And then even later on, when the storms were a little more intense and producing the larger tornadoes, you can see this one here, looks a little bit like it's got the appendage back there, but being these low top supercells are just a lot harder to decipher, at least on the reflectivities. But if you went over to the velocities, that's where it was a whole different ballgame. This was earlier in the day when the first storm was coming up. You can see a very defined couplet over central Chesterfield County there. And then as you go a little bit later on, when the storms were probably at their peak, you can see 3 separate couplets all through the Richmond area. And that's not something you see around here too often. One is enough. 3, and then to have such bright reds up against dark or brighter greens at times, that was scary. And when people that are in these areas, and you're trying to relay as much information as you can to them as possible, it was nerve-wracking. But the cool thing was, a little bit later on, as I was kind of recovering on everything, I got pinged by the Weather Channel to do a live spot for them. So one of my after I kind of cooled off the storms for a bit, they picked me up on the Weather Channel, and so I must have spent probably 15 minutes talking to them about the whole situation, and they used my footage. And Catherine Prosid was nice enough to, while she was still at the Weather Channel, to grab this for me, and so I have video documentation of me being on the Weather Channel for a while. So that was pretty neat too. But the initial thing with these storms coming up here, worried about my house, and my folks live up in this area, and now I'm having to worry about storms heading up to their house. It was a nerve-wracking day, just not just from a storm chasing standpoint, but just what's going on at home and in
Right.
personal lives for such a active day in Richmond. And fortunately for me, nobody was impacted. Unfortunately for others, it was a lot worse of a day. Houses getting, I didn't see any houses that were completely destroyed or anything. There may have been some that had some trees fall into them, but fortunately nothing like you see from the plains with some of the big tornadoes that hit out there.
Right.
But it was an active day. I can't say I'd want to chase a day like that again here anytime soon. If this setup could have occurred in a little more rural area, it would have probably been a little better. But did what I could with it, and almost caught the tornado pretty much there on the Midlothian Turnpike. So a little frustrating there, but one of these days we'll get one in here in the Richmond area on TV, and I'm sure Zach will be thrilled when that happens. As long as it doesn't hurt anybody.
Exactly. And the odds, we'll go to Bill here in a little bit, because he'll talk about his experiences that same day. But I found it ironic that it was the same day as the Hurricane Ivan outbreak in 2004.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah.
So, well, Bill, we saved the best for last, I guess, huh? And you'll talk about the same day.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if best for last. By the way, can you hear me all right on here?
Yeah.
Okay, I got a mic here, so it should reduce the noise. Anyway, that's kind of a bum day for me, because both days, back with Ivan and now with this, I was stuck at work. So you can imagine the frustration of being stuck at work and having these storms go up. And I kind of knew that this was going to go on. So I had all my chase stuff in, ready to go. So anyway, just to show you, can you see my screen? By the way, is it showing? Is it showing some data?
Yeah, you got
Can you and looking at the model, looking at the STP a little bit, and as you can see, got nice area of southeast winds right through our area, and you can see where the center of circulation was off toward West Virginia. I don't know if y'all can see that all right.
Yeah.
So I was kind of ready to go, and even though I was stuck at work, I had about a 2-hour lunch break. So I'm sitting there at work, and all of a sudden I noticed a cell go off to the west near Oilville, and it was going north, and I'm like, well, I'll intercept that on 64. So on my lunch break, I decided to have a lunch break chase, and if you can see, if you look up at the top, there's the velocity couplet right there just to my west, and I am blasting west on 64. Unfortunately, if y'all are familiar with that area, there's a lot of trees with limited areas to get off the road. So I actually kind of overshot that and got in the mesocyclone and couldn't see anything. And I had to backtrack, and as you can see where I'm right there, to my north, and at that point it dropped a tornado, and there was a EF0, EF1 tornado reported just north of the interstate. I was stuck on the interstate and didn't see anything. By then I had to rush back to my office to see some more patients. So as you can imagine, I was going bonkers there at work, not being able to get out. And I'll just show you, I'm looking at the radar. Can you all see that pretty well?
Yeah.
So as you can see, there are multiple tornado warnings across the whole area. Until finally, about 5, I was able to blast out of work and go off and try and intercept some of these cells. And this image right here is of the cell. I believe this is the storm that went near University of Richmond and dropped the tornado. And my viewpoint is I'm looking to the kind of the northeast, and that's the storm. This is about Gaskins and Broad, which, by the way, is a very good barbecue if you like barbecue at Memphis barbecue. But you can kind of see, and in fact, the clouds here, if you look, they have sort of almost a similar appearance as the Ivan day, because I remember that Ivan day very well. Also stuck at work, got out late, and missed everything. But I remember every updraft had, sort of nice, sort of Christmas, and you could see the corkscrewing up and. So anyway, this tornado warned to this point, but I do not believe it was producing at that time. So anyway, I kind of waited around for the next storm to come up, and this one became tornado warned. This was about 5:17 to 5:22, and I had doubled back to almost the same place, and I set up shop in the Genworth parking lot. And are y'all getting that video?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so here I am. I'm in the Genworth parking lot, looking toward the west. That's towards Short Pump. This is Gaskins and not Gaskins. This is Glenside and Broad Street. So you see, had a nice clear slot, and then you see the rising scud right in front. And it was tornado warned at this point. Had a nice wall cloud and rotation, but what was very frustrating with this part of Virginia, look at that line of trees. And you cannot see under the line under these line of trees. And that really looks like, it's a pretty good rotation. And you can see right there, I'm almost sure it was on the ground. And but the frustrating thing was there was no damage reported in that area. In fact, I later on looking at the radar and where I was, I basically tried to crisscross that entire area, and I could not find any damage. Now, of course, there could have been a dust whirl over a parking lot or something, and that might not have been reported as damage. But if you can see right at the end of that arrow, it looks pretty.
Yeah.
It looks pretty much like a tornado at that point. But anyway, it was definitely an exercise in frustration. If you look right in there, do you see that right?
Yeah.
That upward motion there in the clouds.
Yep. I think we've all been there.
And so anyway, I tried to do my own survey, and no damage, but it was certainly it was certainly a very, very interesting day. And look at some more data here. Look, and even some of the models, as you notice there, it showed a lot of nothing major, but you can see, even looking at the HER, showing sort of lots of little rotational tracks just to the west.
Right.
And then if you look at reflectivity, you certainly see where it seems to explode right over the area. So I think it did all things considering, it did a fairly good job at predicting this. Of course, I was stuck at work. So anyway, that's about it. It was a day of frustration, and I can sympathize with Nathan. You're in the same boat with all those trees in the foreground.
Yeah, it's always a challenge here, and that's probably the lesson for folks to take away. Especially those of us, I know all four of us have been chasing out west. The differences out there is the sight lines are almost unobstructed. Most places you go, and you can tell, if a tornado's gonna, if a funnel is gonna touch down as a dust swirl, you can see that. You can see structure a lot better. But here in Virginia, you just kind of have to interpolate, and like as Andrew referred to or mentioned, that you can't really claim a tornado, but you can certainly say, look, it looks like one. It's low to the ground. You know, got to beware. And like, you know, you chase for channel 6 there, and I chase for channel 7 here. You just have to be specific about what you see rather than drawing conclusions you can't back up.
Yeah, I mean, unless I see something on the ground here, I'm not going to say there's a tornado on the ground, because it's just, to me, just bad publicity and just bad information to the public. You know, just saying, oh, yeah, there's got to be a tornado here, it's spinning. But, you know, it's like when that storm was crossing Midlothian, I'm sure somebody out there would have said, man, that's a tornado. But, you know, it wasn't, and you couldn't say it. And, you know, I made sure, at least for my broadcast, that it was, I kept it at that. And I didn't want to mislead the public. I mean, I told them a tornado could happen at any second just from the looks of things, but I didn't want to take it to another level and say there is a tornado happening now. I mean, the storm was warned. We had video of it, so that should have been enough, hopefully, to convince people to take action if they were on the fence about doing anything. So,
yeah.
I tell you, I was very impressed with Channel 6. I was both. I think at one point they were simulcasting on the one of the country stations. I could also get it on, you know, over the internet, and I was impressed with both you know, Nathan's reports and, you know, Zach Daniel and the other folks, you know, kind of following this play by play. And I mean, it kind of reminded me almost of what you get out west a little bit. It was very impressive coverage.
Yeah, I think Zach's experience being out west really showed up that day, and being able to, you know, convey what was going on, read the radars correctly, and, you know, just you know, get the message out and interpret it correctly. So I thought he did a great job, and he was on the air, I think, from 2 o'clock to 7 o'clock. So I don't know how he did it for that long, but everybody I talked to afterwards just like, man, how did he go that long? You know, and like, you know, it only happens a couple times a year, but you got to be ready for it when it happens.
Yeah, you really do. And that's, of course, you know, some of those situations, you know, that setup looked good that day but it didn't look that explosive until it happened.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a very concentrated area where it happened too. It wasn't like it was a widespread severe outbreak. I mean, it happened between pretty much 3 counties, right? And it just happened to be right on the Richmond metro area, which made it all the more explosive because you had a lot more risk for damage and loss of life in that area. Whereas if this had occurred, you know, over Chesapeake Bay, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this right now.
Right. And see, and that was one of the instances where things got flipped on me. You guys, you know, are promoting the fact that the wedge, you know, covers Richmond a lot when we get it, you know, better chasing over here. Well, that day you guys had the action because I wasn't going out that day, because between where I live and Richmond was a bunch of flooded roads, and I wasn't going to drive through them.
Yeah, I'll be happy if this coming year, if we can dry out a little bit and just make it a little less flood prone when you're out there doing your storm chasing this year.
Amen to that.
I tell you, the other thing is when it's right in your hometown is you also have to juggle friends and family. I had my wife and 2 daughters were in the basement, so they were wanting updates on what's going on. I had my workplace, which were kind of depending on me for, you know, information. So I was having to call them, and then of course other friends of mine were texting me, and, you know, since they know I was out chasing. So, and, you know, I'm trying to refer everybody to Channel 6 and or their favorite TV station or the National Weather Service. Mm-hmm. And so I was having to juggle that on top of navigating in almost rush hour. So it was a very challenging chase day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I must have had to tell my wife about 5 times to take shelter because I kept telling her, you're all right. And then the next storm would come along. It's like, oh, never mind, you need to go back. Like, okay, you're right. Oh, wait, you know, you need to go back. And unfortunately, we don't have a basement or anything. She was having a shelter in just a little laundry room, which wasn't the most comfortable spot to be in. So I didn't want her to have to stay in there forever, but, you know, wasn't going to risk it either, knowing that I had seen tornadoes head that way and knew that a couple of them were doozies. So
right. Well, that's pretty much our recap of several days of chasing here, and it wound up being here in Virginia. You know, we want to expand that, of course, beyond to the Mid-Atlantic, but, you know, pretty much if you're chasing anywhere from the Carolinas up to Pennsylvania and even over into New Jersey, you have the same issues to deal with. You know, you've got the trees, you've got roads that don't necessarily make sense in terms of where the storms are going. You've got buildings in the way and topography to deal with. So it's pretty much similar no matter where you are.
How do we think this year stacked up to last year?
You mean 2018 versus 2017?
Yeah.
Actually, I was surprised a couple of times by some setups this past year in 2018. 2017, I thought was kind of a down year for convection here. There were some storms and some setups that happened that I didn't expect. And as a matter of fact, let me, I think I've got one queued up here. I'll show you one that showed up. I can do this. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yep.
All right. Let me just play this for this. This is from August 3rd in Franklin County, and I'm not even sure. We may have been under a marginal risk, but it may not even been that. This storm was not warned, and it sped up several times. But you can see as it's coming over this tree line, you tell how fast that car was going. You see how there's a funnel kind of pops out, and you have this little clear slot that shows up. That was totally unexpected. I was just chasing that day because I wanted to be out and chase, not because the TV station said, "Hey, there's a big storm coming through. Take a look at it." That was just a surprise, and I had that happen 2 or 3 times this past year. So I'd say that the 2017 season was a bit more productive than 2016. I mean, 2018 was more productive than 2017. I'll get it right.
I'd agree with that. I think that there was a lot of tropical energy this year, and tropical energy is what really does it for us around here. And even the April 15th event, which was the EF3 in Lynchburg, that was an anomaly, but it was fed by that tropical moisture. And then of course we had Michael and we had Florence that came directly over us. So it was messy setups, really hard to chase, but it was a big producing year.
Yeah. That April 15th one was a serious cyclic supercell there that came right up the Route 29 corridor from Danville all the way up to Lynchburg, where it dropped that tornado. And I remember being on that. I was chasing with a partner, so we were able to get a little closer than I normally do. And we got within about 3.5 miles of the circulation on radar. Couldn't see anything. Yeah. It was totally rain wrapped.
Yeah. I was in Danville, just south of Danville, watching it come up out of Greensboro there, and we thought we might have seen a shadow back in the rain, kind of a thing. But as soon as we saw it, it's like you got hit by 70-mile-an-hour RFD and absolutely nothing. So we gave up on the storm at that point for safety reasons. A crazy day.
Yeah. So I think to answer your question overall, Andrew, I think the season was this past year was better than the previous year, but the visibilities, the storms weren't as crisp looking. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I'm here. My video is backing up on me, but I would tend to agree. I mean, I had very limited opportunities to get out this year, unfortunately. So when I did, I tried to take advantage of the big days, and I just felt like it was kind of, at least for the days that I went out around here in Richmond, other than Florence, and it was kind of murky. I went out on the Michael day too, and I was in the Channel 6 vehicle that day, and that wound up having a lot of tornadic potential, and they fired off a lot of warnings. There was about a 2-hour window where there was this very odd axis pushing its way up through Richmond, where you had very strong winds to the west, but south of it, the winds were almost dead calm. And we actually sat underneath it at one point out in the Woodlake area of Chesterfield County, where you could actually look into the sky and see those winds racing to the west on one side, and then kind of just puttering their way to the north on the other side. And they kept firing a lot of warnings off at that boundary interaction, but I never saw any tornado reports that came out of it. And it was just impossible to see in that storm because it was just torrential rain everywhere, which I think was a story of a lot of chasing that I actually wound up doing this year. It was just dodging the heavy rain.
Right. Anybody else?
So it was interesting that.
Go ahead, Bill.
I was saying on that same day, I was out chasing down in eastern Virginia. And what sort of struck me was I was on a couple of tornado warned sections, but didn't see anything. But as I was driving back, drove past through Wakefield and up around Richmond on 295, I was really caught off guard in the middle of the night by how strong that storm was, and it almost seemed to strengthen a bit. I was in some rain axis right on 295, probably not far from where I think the firefighter was killed on 295 in that. And it was just an amazing amount of wind and rain for something that should have been completely dying at that point.
Yeah, my interpretation of that, which I haven't gone back and verified it, but just looking at the real time stuff, it seemed to me during Michael that that vertical stack of the typical tropical vertical stack circulation decoupled, and I think the 850 millibar center strengthened and moved north of the surface circulation, and that's what's really caused havoc a little further north than people were expecting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Bill, you're exactly right. It's like about 7:30 that evening. It's like someone flipped a switch, and what had been kind of a relatively calm day, granted, if you were in a storm, it was a little windier, but I hadn't noticed anything with the wind that day until about 7:30, and next thing you know, it was just trees were blowing everywhere. You had the storm rider I was in was getting blown across the road. I mean, it was a complete change in the atmosphere of that storm. I went from feeling like I was chasing storms to, oh, I'm in a hurricane all of a sudden.
Yeah, I can vouch for the strength of Michael too. We were chasing out in the same area as you, Bill, on the tornado warnings near Suffolk, and none of those cells ever produced anything. All the tornadoes happened in the rain, a little further north. But yeah, we drove back on Route 58 right as the core of the storm was coming up into Virginia, and man, it was brutal. And there was like a remnant eye wall or something that came right across the border, and it was like a wall of wind, knocked all the trees down. Took us forever to get home to Blacksburg on Route 58. And then we got to the top of the Blue Ridge, coming over the pass there in Patrick County, and clear skies. I remember the Milky Way was stretched across the sky because the clear slot had ripped apart the southern half of the storm. But it was blowing 80 miles an hour, and it was absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. It was interesting. The two times in that storm that I was, tornado warnings. I think, down to Suffolk, and then I think a little bit to the west a bit. Even though you really couldn't see a whole lot, right before the storm was tornado warned, I would notice you'd get like a shift in the wind, and you start getting inflow into the core, and then it would be tornado warned. I still wouldn't see anything, and then it would dissipate. Because you definite wind shift. Both times I was in tornado warnings.
Yeah, I was in the tornado warning right the one that came right out of Suffolk, and on the backside there, everything was rotating. It was almost a boundary instead of a storm inflow, and there were like 3 or 4 embedded rotations on the backside of that storm, and of course nothing produced. But it wouldn't have taken much, and I think a little later in the evening, inside the rain is where it all happened.
I was going to ask if you saw anything on that, because I was in the Channel 6 studio kind of waiting for stuff to fire off here in the Richmond area when that first tornado warning went off down in Suffolk, and we all kind of caught us off guard. We were like, well, we've been looking at radar, haven't seen anything. And we pulled up the radar on that one. There was nothing on the radar with that. I mean, there was no sign of anything. And we even pulled up one of the news feeds from one of the stations out of the Tidewater. And I think the meteorologist was even kind of like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at here, but there's a tornado warning, so take shelter.
Yeah, it caught me off guard too. We were just thinking about giving up, and then the tornado warning popped right on top of us. Mm-hmm. There was a few guys in my car, but like, hey, we were going to turn right. I guess we'll turn left and go chase this thing.
The only warning you got, you might as well chase it.
Yeah,
that's right.
We got it all on live stream too, so the whole process going out to a Facebook audience, and it was great. We got some of the rotation on the live stream, so that's always good when that works out.
Well, cool. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate your time and your research and pulling this stuff up and giving us some feedback on what these storms were like and how it caused them. we'll have to do this again next year, and so which means we'll have to pay attention to the setups in 2019 and get some good videos, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Hey, thanks a lot, you guys. Appreciate your time, and we'll be talking.
All right. Thanks, Chris, for putting this together, and talk to you again soon.
You betcha. Signing off.
Cool.
Well, Chris, thank you very much. Hey, Chris, are